Sarah. Hi, Greg. Thank you for that. That was really wonderful. And just to kick it off, I was just going to ask a question. If you could share with us some of your faith heroes, and maybe you, sir, started us really nicely talking about one of hers, but from all three of you, of people from your own faith traditions that really inspire you towards interfaith cooperation, and those that you think we should all know about and have in our back pocket when we talk about interfaith cooperation.
Well, three of mine have been mentioned already. Martin King Jr., Malcolm X, Abraham Joshua Heschel all mentioned a woman who's very influential to me. Dorothy Day, the Catholic worker. When I was just kind of coming in, she was on her way out, and I was in Chicago. We were in Chicago in those days, and a priest called me one day and said, Dorothy Day's in town, opening up a new Catholic worker house. Would you like, she'd like to meet you. Do you have time? I said, do I have time? So we had one car in the community, which was always broken, so it didn't work. And so I just sprinted 25 blocks to where she was. I'm in the little parlor waiting for the great woman to come in. And her biography was called, her story was called Love is the Measure of Our, but she was full of love, but she wasn't soft and fuzzy and fluffy. She said, so, you were a radical student like I was in college. I said, yeah. You were a Marxist like I was. I said, yeah, kind of, yeah. And then you became a Catholic. I said, I became a Christian. You're not a Catholic? I swear I said, some of my best friends are Catholic. And she said, okay, so she called us the Protestant Catholic worker. But the Catholic worker was always in place. I mean, it was deeply rooted in that powerful Catholic social teaching. But, you know, I've been in worker houses all over the country, and there were Catholics and other Christians and Jews and Muslims and people who weren't of any faith at all, but they were drawn to what they were doing. They were drawn to the outworking of that faith. So Dorothy has been one of my heroes.
Sure. So I think two people come to mind for me, Alana, in response to your question. One of them actually plays a pretty significant role in my life in terms of what got me involved in this interfaith work, which is what brings me here. And that's a guy by the name of Shane Claiborne. Jim, I think you might know him. Somebody else does. What really struck me about Shane Claiborne when I read his book, Irresistible Revolution, is the way that he made an effort to really take a look at how the life of Jesus, as an example, teaches him as a Christian and as a Christian myself. This is what inspired me to live life in a certain way. And like I mentioned, that's something that brought me into interfaith work. And in fact, it was just a week ago, maybe, we were sitting outside the Union having coffee with Martin Marty, who's a Lutheran theologian who just happened to be passing through town, I guess. And he asked me what brings people to interfaith work on this campus. What is it that motivates people to be here, to be a part of this dialogue? And I've been a student here for 6 years and been doing interfaith work for about that long. And I think that every year I see a new reason why someone comes to the table. But for me, it was Shane Claiborne's example that sort of brought me to the table because as I looked at his life as an example of a follower of Christ, and then as I got to know Ibu Patel, who's the guy that we're all sad is not here tonight, I started to recognize a couple of themes. One, in following Jesus, Jesus's footsteps in the tradition that I grew up in, and two, in taking that and bringing that into a religiously diverse world, and learning as a follower of Christ, as someone who believes that he's called to serve others, how that is also a tool for reaching across the barriers that separate me from people with other backgrounds. So there's a long answer to why Shane Claiborne is one of my heroes.
I don't want to take up too much time. I mentioned how I learned about Malcolm X at an early part of my development as a college student and read his autobiography. And one of the things that's really difficult to talk about is faith heroes who are also female. And you brought this up briefly, but at this part of my life, I'm also thinking about strong female figures, and unfortunately, leadership in the Muslim community has been predominantly male. And we've got wonderful examples from the time of the Prophet and his wives and the example that they set for the Muslim community. So I can talk at length about that. But I'm hoping that your call to action is taken up by a lot of young Muslim women in the audience today and outside of this room, that tomorrow's faith heroes can, among them, there can also be vibrant, dynamic Muslim women. And I hope that some of you will be my faith heroes. That sounds cheesy, but it's true.
Daisy Khan, who is in New York, is a great woman to listen to and read her stuff. One of my students last year was at this millennial thing. She's a Muslim woman, senior now, and she's going from Pakistan. And she's going, as she graduates, back to Pakistan for a year of volunteering with women in Pakistan. So when I met her in class and began to listen to her and read her papers, I said, the Muslim Brotherhood is in serious trouble with women like you coming up, so I think you're right about that.
Hi. Microphones make me nervous, but I'm going to do this anyway. I really have two things on my mind. One I'm real sure about, and that is, Jim, I absolutely want to plug your book, God's Politics. It was an excellent read for me and at a very tough time in my spiritual walk. The other thing is, I guess I'm wondering what impact, if any, you guys are seeing on the theologies of salvation when people of different faiths get together and love each other and find these common causes, and then there are these theologies of salvation that are sort of exclusionary. And I'm just kind of wondering if this whole movement is having an impact on that.
Well, people ask that question of my friend Steve Stone, pastor, and he was doing this work in Cordova, and they said, "How are you witnessing to Christ?" He said, "By loving our neighbors." No, wait, witnessing to Christ. He said, "Yeah, by doing what he said, loving our neighbors." And what I find is that's very powerful, and people who wouldn't be drawn to that exclusionary theology are drawn to people doing the things they imagine Christ would want them to do. And Michael Lerner and I, Michael's a Jewish rabbi, and we were having a big civil disputes in Washington about the budget, and budget cuts to poor people, which they used to do in America. And he said, "Is there a room for a rabbi?" I says, "Yeah, actually, we're going to read Isaiah. You can read the text." So we're in the rotunda, and he read the text, and then we all got arrested and taken to jail in D.C. And Tony Campolo, the Baptist evangelist, and Michael Lerner were on the bench in D.C. jail all night long talking about Christ. Who was Christ? Was he a prophet? Was he the Son of God? It was a Christological conversation between the rabbi and the Baptist minister. And so I'm watching them, and that's how we do this interfaith work. We all get arrested together and discuss theology in jail.
Formerly of Evanston and Reba Place Church before we moved here. And I'd just like to ask all of you if you could comment on the value, place of prayer in this whole interfaith work from your different traditions. Thank you.
So I'm not sure if I'm exactly answering your question, but I'll say what comes to mind as I think about that. Because prayer is something that, of course, is a value in my tradition, and it has been since I was young, but also something that I still struggle to understand what role it plays in my own life now. And something I believe is a valuable practice, but I still struggle with exactly the depths of that. I think one thing that I've learned, and as Jim was talking about, the relationships that are happening here in interfaith work on this campus and in my own experience is the way that I learn from the disciplines of others. And so that's not to say that I necessarily learn more about my own theology, although sometimes I think I do, but in that seeing the ways that my peers and my friends practice their own faith, even in traditions that are drastically different than mine, some traditions which value prayer or stick to prayer much in a much more disciplined way than I personally do. That's something that's convicting for me and something that inspires me. And so as a Christian, that's where I find prayer to play a role in interfaith collaboration.
All right. So recently I was visiting campus of UW-Madison, and afterwards one of the staff of their Multicultural Student Center asked, "We're so excited to have Interfaith Youth Corps on campus. Could you tell us more about how you do interfaith prayer?" And I was sort of taken aback by that question because we don't do interfaith prayer. And I think in the way that we encounter prayer in our interfaith work, we identify it, and I'm not speaking on behalf of ICIC, this is my own interpretation, but we identify it as something that's a very personal, individual practice that can bring, as Greg was saying, diverse individuals together. At ICIC's Chicago office, we have a prayer room, which we're very lucky to have. And the Christians will go off and have their noonday prayer on a daily basis. And then Muslims will take their time to pray. As a Muslim, I pray 5 times a day. But for me, I think having that separate time, that sacred time to be Muslim and to be around peers and people who worship God in the same language and in different ways, but also under this Muslim umbrella, is something that's very fulfilling. And so we encourage young people who have a religious affiliation to pray in the way that they feel comfortable. And so at our interfaith events or training sessions, there will be designated areas, like in our office, where people can go off to the side and pray. And there are also opportunities to welcome observers if the individuals are comfortable having that. But I think that's a very interesting question, and we haven't really delved into defining or creating an interfaith prayer, but it's an interesting question that comes up and allows people to really get to know each other on a very personal basis.
See, I'm really glad you expressed that, because I agree strongly with that, and I'm not one who wants to go in the direction of interfaith prayers being that you're in a group with all kinds of, and no one can say anything that everyone doesn't agree with. Those are miserable prayers. You know, there's nothing, that's not going to bring you back to prayer. So how do you pray in the deepest of your own tradition? And sometimes when there can be observing or listening or participating, but also sometimes we think about prayer as just so much talking. I just came off a 3-month sabbatical. You know, for me, I was just really wrestling with prayer. Often there's just to stop talking and just to do a lot more listening. God's trying to speak to us, and through all the noise of our lives and our work and our overwork and sometimes, for me at least, the last 3 months it was just not talking and getting up. When I write, I like to do sunrise walks on this beach and get up in the dark, and then there's a place I would go when the sun was rising, and that's when I did my yoga and my prayer and run back to where I was writing. And I would just sit and listen for a long time. And that was better prayer for me than I've had for a long time. So someone just I can see us listening to it together in a room, just quietly praying in our own way, but listening for God to speak to us in different kinds of ways. And going to the prayers of other traditions is a very formational thing. And where that's appropriate and respectful, we can do that too. But I love that. Don't try to have a kind of a watered down interfaith prayer that has nothing to say and just really won't draw anybody's heart to it.
Hey, I'm Chelsea. I'm also from Evanston, like 6 blocks from Beaver Place. I got a little excited. Anyway, hi, thank you for coming. That was an awesome talk. I was wondering if you could say a little more about what you said at the end, how we don't need less faith, we need more faith, we don't need no religion, we need better religion. I was wondering how you think that applies to the non-religious and their involvement in interfaith work, and what kind of role they have to play in sort of your vision, I guess.
Last night, after this Millennial Day, there was a dinner, and there was 16 student leaders from around the country here for this Millennial thing at Georgetown. And then Tim Shriver spoke, and the president was there, Jack DeJoya. And we're about faith, and this young woman at the table next to mine took the microphone, and you could tell she was nervous, and she said, I'm really, really glad to be here, and I really appreciate all this talk about faith, and I grew up in a tradition of faith, but I'm an atheist, and I'm wondering if I have any place here, or how I relate, or your question. And a couple of the students, tried to speak to her and make her feel included. Well, we have common ground, and let's find common ground. So I wasn't, because I'd spoken earlier today, I wasn't speaking at dinner, but I just felt I needed to take the microphone. I said, I want to thank you for having the courage to speak up. And I want to say as a faith leader, I want to say to you, religion has no monopoly on morality. Religion has no monopoly on morality. There are people that I have literally put my life in the hands of, in situations of violence, in jail cells around the country, who are some of the closest people to me, and yet they haven't been people of faith. And I reminded her that, King and Heschel, but there were people in the movement, at the heart of it, at the top of it, in close association, who were not people of faith. And there's a whole new denomination of people who would say, I'm spiritual but not religious. It's a new activity. In like Portland, Oregon, that's the biggest church out there. So you've got, how do you really be welcoming for people, and you're trusting their moral, why they're there, and then you can have conversations about faith and belief and all the rest. But you've got to make space. So when I do book tours sometimes, like God's Politics, and then have a great night, and then I'll say, are there any people here who aren't people of faith, but heard the NPR show today and just came to hear the talk, and they kind of, and they said, how'd you feel about tonight? And I said, well, I wasn't sure. If this was in a church, I wouldn't have come. But it was in a bookstore, so I could come, right? But I want to say, I really felt welcome tonight. And that's encouraging to me, not as a person of faith, but someone who believes in the things you're talking about, but not as a person of faith. So I think that's an important question to all of you guys.
Hi, this is a question for all three of you, but in reference to Jim Wallis, when you were speaking and you were joking about how there weren't any Chicago media outlets here, and then later on,
I'm sure there are.
I mean, but you were just saying, visibly, and then you were making a point also of sharing some very inspirational stories to us, and it's very clear that you are in a place where there is a lot of media and a lot of very good journalism going on in Washington, D.C. But this is a question for all three of you. Who are you listening to or watching or reading who are journalists or writers or people who are talking about some of these positive, inspirational stories about interfaith cooperation that maybe we should be paying attention to?
So at ICIC, we do a lot of sharing of books that we're reading, and there's one particular thought that comes to mind. I thought about mentioning it earlier today, but I'm glad you asked. There's, my head's all in social science theory these days, so there's this one scholar at Brown University whose name is Ashutosh Varshney, and he did this great research about the riots that happened in India between Muslims and Hindus from, I think, 1950 to 1995. And he took a look at situations or cities where the relationships between the Hindu and Muslim populations were really tense, and situations where Hindus and Muslims worked together in the face of conflict and tension and violence. And he found that neighborhoods and communities where there were strong networks of communication and relationships and associations that individuals worked on and organizations they worked on with people from different backgrounds, that those communities successfully got through those really difficult times. And so he talks a lot about that. And so if you're interested in looking at more historical examples or more theory behind the kind of stuff we're talking about, I would suggest Varshney. There's also great work written by Robert Putnam. I'm sure people have heard of Robert Putnam. And a lot of the conversations we're having here about mutually inspired relationships are supported by his work. And he talked about how there's one theory that Putnam has, it's called Pal-Al. And he talks about why if you have an individual who's your buddy, who you're, for example, in a beekeeping organization with, that's his example, not mine, that because of this association, you will have more positive, you'll have an appreciation of Pal-Al and also of the community that he comes from. So I would recommend looking up Varshney, look up Putnam, and I'm sorry I don't remember the exact titles off the top of my head, but I'm happy to speak with anybody who wants to know more about this kind of stuff.
Okay, I have 3 things to say. There are 2 things that, for me as a Christian, kind of dominate the dialogue around interfaith activism, if I can call it that. The first, of course, I could not say this, is Sojourners, which probably dominates my RSS feed on a daily basis, which is a great thing. The second thing, that's something I've recently discovered, is an organization called Q Ideas, led by Gabe Lyons. And Jim, I think you were there last week, maybe, at their conference. And so there's another organization that's taking this kind of conversation and having it on a regular basis. For me as a Christian, those are 2 things that appeal to me. The other thing I wanted to say is, you asked who are we listening to? I think in today's, in the modern age, what we need to be doing is listening to each other. So, in fact, I'm an MD PhD student. I have no free time. But my friend Cameron over there and I managed to even start our own blog, and we've done pretty well for the past year. A lot of the voices in this room, and I could probably count, more than 10 or 20, just looking out there, are folks who have something to say about this and are writing about it and talking about it. And that ranges from blog platforms to books. Our friend Chris Stedman is coming tomorrow, and he has a book coming out very soon. Chelsea is excited about that. To even Twitter, so it's like 140 characters, right? And Chris Stedman's another one who dominates my Twitter feed. But so I think we should be listening to each other, and that's kind of why we're here at the ICIC in Illinois.
I know a lot of religion reporters in the main media, and they have a hard time because their newsrooms, their environment doesn't understand religion very well. In fact, sometimes they just came from the police beat on the way to a better beat, and they're not even religious people, and they don't really know what's going on. So we do a lot of, at Sojourners, religion 101 for the media, because they often, I think the media generally doesn't understand or cover religion very well, and they like the conflicts. They really are drawn to their conflicts. I'd like to read people who write about what people of faith are doing. Nicholas Kristof, one of my favorite columnists, Washington New York Times. Nick is not a person of faith. He calls himself a seeker, but he goes around the world. He goes to the most forgotten places in the world and writes about the most forgotten people. And in those places, and with those people, who he finds already there are people of faith, by and large. And Nick would say, Nick is a Upper West Side, Manhattan, liberal lefty. He said, I don't find my friends there. I find people of faith there, Catholic sisters and evangelical missionaries and all kinds of people with the most forgotten people. And it's really, for him, as he's actually from Portland, Oregon, he's very secular, But it's really opened up to him the possibilities of faith because of what he's seen people do. You know, so I love it when people tell stories about what people are doing, more than just having arguments about theology, which never goes very far in the newspaper.
Hi, my name's Kate, and I'm with a group from Augustana College, which is a small school about 3 hours from here. And on our campus, and even in our larger community, we faced a problem with people misunderstanding what interfaith work is, and we've gotten everything from, oh, I thought your group was limited to Protestant Catholic dialogue to, are you guys inventing your own religion? So we were just wondering if you all had any helpful insights to share when you are faced with that misunderstanding.
Good question. I get that question a lot. So, how do I usually answer it? I think that sometimes in the professional work that I'm involved in, it helps to give a framework to conversations like that. So I will share the 3-part framework of interfaith collaboration, of religious pluralism, and explain the 3 different parts: respect, relationships, and common action. But sometimes I think the most effective way of explaining what interfaith work is by sharing stories. We've been talking about stories a lot. And so one of the things I found myself doing when faced by this question was telling what drew me to interfaith work and how it plays out in my life. So I recommend you sharing stories about how you got involved with the interfaith work that you're doing. One of the questions, I used to get this question a lot from Muslims, actually, and it came from, well, what is this interfaith? Are you trying to convert our Muslim children into other religions? And is pluralism about presenting religious identities as a buffet to choose from? And so that takes a lot of time, and I'm still working on it with the Muslim community in Chicago, but the strategy that I've used is by telling my story and how learning about young people like Greg, like Chelsea, has actually helped me strengthen my identity. And so if you want to consider it or interpret it this way, interfaith work is about bringing communities together and also strengthening our identities and our beliefs, whether they are religious or non-religious.
Hello. I have a question. You guys were talking about your faith heroes, but a lot of them feel like they were a lifetime ago, a whole different society, a lot of different problems. And a problem we face trying to get interfaith as a norm on our campus is not necessarily that people disagree with it, but they don't see the importance. So you're talking about how in this room we could have major faith leaders, but it's almost like it's an entirely different climate. It still is necessary, but people don't think that it's something that they need to dedicate themselves to. How would you recommend going about trying to show people that it's still very important?
So if I'm hearing your question right, is how do we tell people that interfaith cooperation is important? If the examples are maybe a generation ago, why is it important today? So let me give you one example, and that's tomorrow at 2 o'clock. So some of you are smiling because you know what I'm talking about. The biggest interfaith service project that this campus has ever seen, and many of you may have even been there and you didn't even know that we were calling it an interfaith service project, but it was, even if you didn't know it. Was in 2010, a few months after the earthquake in Haiti. We had a project over in Champaign at the abandoned Hobby Lobby that sent 1 million meals through the Salvation Army in emergency food relief to the people of Haiti. And so there's a snapshot, right, of what can happen when people decide that they're going to come together and work together to help those who are in need. And that's for me at least, and in many ways when you think about it, that's where these relationships start. That's where interfaith cooperation begins, is when we're working together for something that we do believe in, that we all agree on, is important to do. So tomorrow, and if you don't know about this, or you didn't sign up because you weren't interested, tomorrow at 2 o'clock, we're doing something similar. We're not doing 1 million meals, we're sending 30,000 to the Eastern Illinois Food Bank. Because something that we've learned, or something that I've learned, and many of you probably already know, is that hunger is a real issue in our own community. in East Central Illinois. So I would say that's where it begins. If there's disinterest, we need to begin with identifying where the need is and demonstrating how coming together allows us to meet that need in unique and profound ways. So join us tomorrow at 2. Now you have no excuses not to be here.
Just a quick story. Bono once was asked, "Are you a practicing Christian?" And Bono said, "Yeah, I keep practicing. I practice and practice. I hope someday to get there." And I think what people are drawn to is not the proclamation of our faith traditions, but the practicing of it. That's what's drawing your generation, the practice of faith. And I'm particularly very hopeful about your generation. I can tell you stories all night long about young women and men around the country who are practicing their faith, and that opens up people to faith who really weren't open to it before at all. The proclamation didn't reach them or turn them away. Or the first time I was on the Jon Stewart show, I got these emails by the hundreds afterwards, and they said, I lost my faith, they said, because of television preachers, bad religious fundraising, pedophile priests cover up bishops' White House theology. Or they said, I didn't know, they literally said, I didn't know you could be a Christian and care about poverty, or care about the environment, or care about the war in Iraq. When they found out, they got really excited. So on the book tour, I'd be, I'd be in airports and staying in these places, and I'd be stopped all the time in the airport or in the street or by the bellhop. I saw it. I saw the show last night, and these are not necessarily religious people, but they got open to the idea of faith because they heard it could be practiced in ways they never imagined. So in this time, it'll be the practicing of our faith or the proclamation of it that draws people to it.
I just wanted to follow up with a question, because what you said kind of triggered a memory from Northwestern a few years ago when you were on stage there at the ICIC conference. You just mentioned that people are drawn to the way that our faith is practiced when we're doing this sort of social action. And I know that you, of course, know this. That's not something new and novel to our faith traditions. That's maybe something that's essential. I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about your own faith experience and how you came to understand that as so essential to your faith. I seem to remember something about cutting verses out of the Bible or something to that effect, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Well, real quick, I was raised in a Midwest evangelical Christian home and family, very middle America, and but I was raised in Detroit, and I got to be about 14 or 15, and I began to have these questions about what was happening in my city, and nobody was talking about it. And I said, how come we live the way we do in white Detroit, and life seems so different in black Detroit from what I'm, now reading the papers, I'm listening to my world in my city as a teenage kid, and nobody had answers. Well, we don't know why it's that way, or when you get older you'll understand, or the only honest answer I got was, if you keep asking that question, you're going to get into a lot of trouble. And that proved to be true. And I went into the city as a young kid, and I just walked the streets, and I met the black church, and they took in this crazy white kid with full of questions. And I came back with new answers, new questions, and new friends. And one day, an elder said, Jim, you have to understand, Christianity has nothing to do with racism. That's political. And our faith is personal. And that's the night that I left. In my head, in my heart. And I left my faith in church and joined the civil rights and student movements of my generation. And then came back to faith later after reading the New Testament. That's a different story. But went to seminary in Chicago, and the first thing we did was we found all the verses in the Bible that talk about poor people, poverty, wealth and poverty, the oppressed, the afflicted. 2,000 verses in the Bible about poor people. And one of my colleagues who's still at Sojourners took a pair of scissors and literally cut out of the Bible all those verses, cut them out, all on the cutting room floor. And when he was done, that Bible, which we still have, was in shreds, almost falling apart. It was a Bible full of holes. I would take it out to preach and I would say, this, my brothers and sisters in America, this is our Bible. It's full of holes. All we ignored and paid no attention to whatsoever. I see a new generation really putting our scriptures back together again. There's a new Bible called the Poverty Bible World Vision, and the British Bible Society put it out, and they told that story that I just told you as inspiring this Bible, and all those texts are now put back in World Vision orange, so you don't miss them, all the poverty texts. And to me, that's a sign of what a new generation can do, kind of for us putting our Bibles back together again, and by the practice of our faith, and that's what I think will draw people to faith.
Hi, my question is on politics and religion, and since we're in an election year, and in our generation we've seen someone who is non-white, who's African American, assume the role of presidency and get elected, and I was wondering what your sort of timeline was. This could be for any one of you, but as to whether this country, which is predominantly Christian, will elect someone who's, not Christian into power. Because I think religion and politics there's a strong tie there. And do you think it is an issue for someone who is not Christian to hold position of in politics? So. If I'm making myself clear, that's my question. So is it an issue that there aren't many non-Christians in power, who, in politics?
You just opened up an hour's conversation here, which we won't do. I'll just be very, very quick. Yeah, in this country, most people who are running for the presidency will talk about their faith, and usually it's in very political ways that will help them to get elected. I know Barack Obama. He is a Christian. He's not he thinks Muslims are great, but he's not a secret Muslim, as they say. But I want to say clearly, the theology or the religion, the personal faith of a candidate should not matter to us. Mitt Romney's Mormonism should not matter to us. His policies, his leadership, his moral compass, the moral compass of a candidate should matter. And to hear what shapes her or his compass is important. That helps us. But we really have to take theology out of this altogether and evaluate them by the moral compass that we have and they have, and whether that I'd rather have a competent Muslim as president than an incompetent Christian. We've had a lot of incompetent Christians in the White House. You could probably think of some. And so, I think theology shouldn't matter. Their leadership is what we need to look for.
Hello. Many of us in this community have been able to see the movie Boudreaux. I really admired the women that saved the town of Boudreaux in Palestine. and a 15-year-old who threw herself in front of the caterpillar that was digging the olive trees up. And they saved the town, and it was by nonviolence.
All right, thank you. I think we can maybe take one more question, and then we'll kind of wrap things up, and I think there are some cookies waiting in the back.
Hi, my name's Halima. My question's regarding, I don't know if you guys saw I think it was last week's Time magazine cover, which was called Rethinking Heaven. And it was about how a lot of people's view of heaven is starting to change, where people are going from really hoping for this afterlife to looking for making this world a better place. And they're saying a lot of those perceptions are spurred. I mean, people still believe in heaven, but they're very focused on making this world a better place, and that's more of an ultimate goal for a lot of people now. And a lot of people are saying that that's because people are starting to connect social justice and faith a great deal. And but one of the criticisms of that was that social justice motivated people who turn to faith are oftentimes people of privilege, and who might have the quote from the article, I believe, was people who are in the suburbs wearing skinny jeans who tend to have that philosophy. And my question was that, especially with the interfaith movement, which is so focused on creating dialogue on the basis of service learning, do you think that this people moving in the direction of making the world a better place as opposed to hoping for heaven a lot is a result of service learning in a pluralistic society? And do you think that interfaith manifests itself differently in different socioeconomic classes?
The Lord's Prayer ends with, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That's what Jesus said. And it's about bringing, the whole idea of the kingdom of God is the inbreaking of a new order, the inbreaking of heaven into earth. It's meant to change everything about the world. So I thought the article was interesting and helpful. My experience, my view of Christian faith was totally changed by the black church when they kind of took me in as a young white kid from the evangelical world. And, I've lived in neighborhoods most of my life that were poor neighborhoods, and the people who kept those neighborhoods alive, who were the glue that kept life together, were often people of faith from the black churches. And life was hell in those neighborhoods most of the time. And they're the ones who kept heaven alive in those neighborhoods. Black church women in particular, keeping whole neighborhoods. They were the glue that held neighborhoods together. And without them, a lot of folks wouldn't have survived. So often at the very bottom of society, it's those who have that kind of understanding of faith coming right down. My view of the incarnation is in God, Jesus. It hits the streets. That's what it means. Hitting the streets. That's what it means. So for me, I learned most of that from the black churches. So that's very much the kind of vision of justice that shapes my life. Came right from my teenage experience with the black churches.
I'll just say one quick thing. Okay. So I'm not familiar with the article. I will check it out. Though right before coming out to this conference, I was talking with one of my Jewish colleagues, Alana, and we were talking about how in the Muslim tradition, there's a saying of the Prophet that if the end of times is near, then if you have a seed in your hand, plant it. And there's a similar concept in the Jewish tradition. So I think that for a lot of the young people that we work with, they recognize that from their own faith traditions, there is this value for working on this earth to improve living conditions and to work on social justice causes, as much as there is this call to be a righteous individual and to attain a place in heaven, or not for Jewish people, but like to do good, or for in the Jewish tradition it's called tikkun olam, or repair the earth, or repair the world.
I'll just add a quick thought, and then I'm going to wrap this up for us. And that really resonates, of course, with what Jim said. And I had mentioned earlier today, QIDEA is an organization I kind of keep my finger on in terms of hearing about some of this dialogue. And I think Gabe Lyons, who founded QIDEAs in a recent book called Next Christians, is someone who kind of is on to this this idea. And for me personally, as a Christian, as I look at the life of Christ, it's the understanding becomes that the kingdom of God is sort of here, and it's coming, and so it's not all about heaven; it's about here as well, and those are part of the same narrative. And Jim has something to say.
You just sparked it. It's about, where does the hope come from? When your neighborhood or your world or your country is literally in hell, where does your hope come from? And I have learned that from people who had the faith in the middle of the hell that heaven was coming, not just someday but now. So I'll end with a quick story. So in the worst of times in South Africa, I got invited to come and be with them, the South African churches, to find a strategy to finally bring down apartheid, which became the sanctions campaign that brought it down. But I remember I had to be snuck into the country because my name was on all the security lists in South Africa. So I got snuck in the country and went to meet Desmond Tutu at his cathedral, St. George's in Cape Town. And they were going to have a rally, and it got canceled by the authorities. So Desmond said, "We're going to have church." Just have church, they won't cancel that. So sure enough, we had church. I had just arrived in the country, and so here we are, huddled in this little cathedral, surrounded by the South African security police, military, outnumbering us 3-to-1, heavily armed, automatic weapons, tear gas, riot gear. They were there to frighten us. And with me at least, it was working pretty well. And Desmond Tutu got up to speak, to preach. And just as he did, they broke open the door in the back. They broke through the doors, and the South African security police lined the entire place with pads of paper and pencils and tape recorders to tape everything that he was going to say. Now, these guys are thugs. I've actually been interrogated by them. They're thugs, and they're scary, scary people. And they were in his cathedral, and they were saying, in effect, "We own this country. We own this church. We own your religion. We own you. We own your God. We're in control." And he stopped preaching, and he bowed his head as if in prayer, and then he finally looked up, and he looked right at them, and he said, "You're very powerful. You are very powerful, but you are not gods. And I serve a God who will not be mocked." Then he began to bounce like a good Baptist preacher. He said, "So, we invite you today to come and join the winning side." We're totally surrounded by them. And he invites them to join our winning side. And the young people leapt out of their seats and they began dancing. It's called a toi-toi. It's a kind of a chanting, stomping dance. And we danced outside, and the police all moved back. They didn't expect dancing worshipers, And we danced, surrounded by the police. 10 years later, I was at the inauguration of Nelson Mandela. Had the blessing to be there. And guess who was master of ceremonies? Archbishop Desmond Tutu. He looks a little bit like Yoda, He's a long, flowing, little tiny guy. And I said, "Bishop, do you remember that day? Do you remember at St. George? Remember what you said? What we did?" He smiled. He remembered. I said, "Today, Bishop, they've all joined the winning side. Because you couldn't find one white South African in that country that day who wouldn't say, 'Well, I've always been against apartheid.'" And we, with tears in our eyes, 150,000 of us listened to Nelson Mandela announce the birth of a new nation, you know. But you see, where people of faith are in need are not at the party, not at the inauguration, the celebration. It was a great thing to be there. We're needed back at St. George's, where you can't even see the party except through the eyes of faith, to believe that we're going to be on the winning side. That's what makes change happen. Faith prompts hope, creating action and causing change. That's always the way it happens. That's why our faith is necessary, because we supply the one thing you can't change the world without, which is hope. That's our job. That's our vocation of faith. Maybe a good place to end.